I wanted to make everybody aware, in case you aren't somebody who plugs in very often. Last week I did record the sermon, and I'm recording this week as well, so no booze audibly. You can shake your hands, but the mic will pick you up if you say anything too terrible. But those are then being shared to our Facebook page as well. And so on our bulletin this morning, you'll see there's a couple questions for reflection. Those are also going to be on the Facebook page. And I'm going to be a little trite to say, the more we talk on the Facebook page, the more Facebook says, oh, this is good, we should share this with everybody. And so if you want to participate in the conversation this week, I would encourage you to. I think it'll be a good time, and it'll be super fun. Welcome to our friends from Facebook. This morning on Mother's Day, I always want to take a moment to recognize that Mother's Day isn't always a happy day for everybody. Of course, this is a day of celebration where we recognize the ways that we've been loved by our mothers, but there are those in the world who don't experience kindness and love from their mothers, who maybe have strained relationships, who maybe, let's just be honest, are too much like their mothers to get along with their mothers, right? We recognize that there are those who have lost their mothers. Kayla's mother passed away several years ago of breast cancer, and today's a hard day because of that. We know that there are those who very desperately want to be mothers, and for whatever reason, whether it be a health issue or a relationship reality, they aren't able to become biological mothers. We know that there are those who just don't want to have a kid living in their house all the time, but serve in that role of faithful mother, but as an aunt who gets to give the kids back every day, right? We know that there are women who take care of children in daycares, or teachers who come together and play important motherly roles in the lives of many children and even adults. And we also recognize that there are those who are living in very difficult situations, grandmothers who are raising their grandchildren and even great-grandchildren who are now mothers for the third time. That these are difficult situations. And so as we celebrate on this day, let us remember to do it in love and grace, and recognizing that days that we might have something to celebrate that other people might find challenging. I always like to add that preface as an act of grace and love for those. This morning, I wanted to reflect out of this passage in 1 Kings, and to kind of set the scene, right? In 1 Kings, we have Elijah, who is a prophet of God. A prophet is somebody who is sent by God to proclaim God's word. And oftentimes, it is a condemnation that God has for what's going on. God sends a prophet to say, hey, this path that you're on leads nowhere good. You need to get off of it. And so Elijah is sent to a world that is just falling to pieces. Every king, beyond every king, is doing worse and worse and worse than the last king. We have people who are building these temples to Baal, and they're building Asherah poles that people are coming to worship at. They're encouraging this pagan and idolatrous worship in their communities. They are marrying people that they shouldn't be marrying, and creating alliances that they have no business making and that will not be good for the people. And things are falling apart. And God sends Elisha to be a proclaimer that things need to get back on track. And part of that is proving again God's power, God's majesty. Here in a couple of chapters, we'll have one of my favorite scenes where Elijah has a God off with the worshipers of Molech. But here, we see that this punishment has fallen over the nation of Israel, that there has been this drought that is happening in this area of the world. Now, it's fairly common, right? We know that this is an area of the world. The Fertile Crescent is what the area of the world is called, because it's situated with these mountains on the one side and then the Mediterranean on the other side. And oftentimes it blows in these nice wet winds that are nice and fertile for the ground. This is the reason that people keep fighting over the promised land, because it is such a fertile place of the world. But they do experience droughts. And to kind of get our mind to that, because as 21st century Americans, we don't often experience droughts in the same way as the rest of the world, right? Maybe our yards get a little crunchy. Maybe the vegetables that we grow for mostly fun don't produce as much as we'd like, but many of us don't experience hunger for months because of a drought. And so to kind of hone in our minds on the concern that comes with drought, I'm going to take us back to 2020, to the great toilet paper drought. Right, as you're coming to the end of the roll, few sheets left. You know they don't have any at the grocery store, and you think, what am I going to do when I run out? What will happen when I run out? We also know that there's this reality in droughts, when some people have and some people do not. When there is scarcity afoot, people become greedy. Greed is a product of scarcity. And so we know that many people went out as soon as the toilet paper shipments hit the shelves. What did they do? They bought it all. They'd buy like 50, 60 cases. The grocery stores, remember, they had the signs, limit 2 packages of toilet paper. We had to ration this stuff out. Food pantries all over the world were being hit with people coming. Do you have any toilet paper? Yeah, I could use some milk and eggs, but toilet paper, do you have any? It's a little funny now in hindsight, but imagine that concern as you know that end of your supply is coming. This is where we find this mother today. She's out on this walk into the countryside gathering sticks so she can go and make a fire to cook one last meal for her and her son. She knows this is the last one. She knows that there is no more after this. She's a widow, right? She doesn't have a job where she's providing for herself. She doesn't own any farmland, and even if she did, it's not producing anything. She has no way of plugging into resources to get any kind of help. There are no food stamps in the first century, let alone a few thousand years before that. And Elijah comes up, and this is so telling me. It's so interesting to me. And you can see this woman's heart of generosity even in this, right? He comes up and he says, will you go and fetch me some water? And it says, yeah, she jumps into action and she goes to fetch him water. In the middle of a drought, she goes to get him water. And you can almost picture this scene, right? As she's walking away, yeah, sure, I can get you some water. And she starts to walk away and he says, and can you make me some bread? And you can, I just see it in my mind so clearly, where she stops. And she turns around, right? Can you see this? I can get you some water. But the bread, let me tell you about that situation. I've got a little handful of flour left and a little bit of oil, and I'm about to go home and I'm going to make the very last meal that my son and I will eat, and then we will just have nothing and we will die. Now, it's English, so we've translated this as bread, but I want to make sure we understand the real thing that's happening here, right? Because they aren't making a nice loaf of, like a French bread or something like that, right? No, she has flour, she has oil. This is going to be hardtack. It's going to be like a hard cracker at the end of the day. And they're just going to, probably no spices, no salt, just eating basically flour that has gotten wet and then gotten hot. A miserable last meal. And then they'll sit there and they'll wait for the end to come. Can we even imagine what that would be like to be in that place? There's something so moving about this, particularly on Mother's Day, Because I see so many mothers, and my mom included, who are the kind that kind of scrimp and save, and they get together as much as they possibly can because they don't want their kids to experience any of the hardship that comes with the financial realities of where their household really is. Are we aware of this? That this is a thing that exists. Moms who skip meals so that their kids can eat. I wonder if that's the situation here. She says she's going to go make a loaf of bread for her and her son. I wonder what the proportions of the serving sizes are going to be. I don't think she probably is going to take a half. She's getting together whatever she possibly can to get her son as far as she possibly can. And Elijah asks for this little bit that she has. I can't give you that. He says, let me tell you what's going to happen. Go and make your bread, but make me some bread first. And I'm going to tell you what God has said. God has said that your flour will never go empty. Your jar of oil will never run dry. If you are generous with what you have, God will assure that you always have. I love that she says, okay, I'm going to trust in God's provision, and I'm going to put generosity first. Mind you, when he tells her to do this, he says, make yourself your loaves, but first make mine. Generosity comes first in this giving cycle. She has such a generous heart, a generous spirit, and at the end, she says, yeah, I'm going to do this. And just as it was said, throughout the drought, which lasted years, right? You did the circle maker a couple months ago, right? We talked about that drought that happened. For years, her jar and her pot never go empty. I like that there are two readings of this, right? Historically, people have read this in two very different ways. And I think they both offer a value to our understanding of generosity and of hospitality and of caring for others that we see in this mother today. The first is that the filling of the jar and the filling of the pot are a miraculous work of God, right? That just like that manna that fell from heaven in the Old Testament, right? That maybe the woman, she went to bed at night and she woke up in the morning, she opened the jar and found it full again. Maybe between meals, she just didn't even look. She just would scoop out the flour that she needed. And somehow it just kept a scooping. That she would just dump the oil that she needed. And somehow the bottom never came. The ends always were met. And we understand this as a miraculous work of God, that she has this abundance that God is supplying for her. And we recognize that in our lives. I love, because this is like language I use. I was so glad to see on our slides last week that as God gave first, we give back. I love that. Because that really is the theology that we have, that we aren't giving to God from what we have. We're giving to God from what God has already given us. That there's nothing that we can give away that's ours. Our gifts, our calls, our life, our very breath come first and foremost from God. And so this woman giving these things away, it's great because it's God's to give away. I love that. There's a second reading of this that's less, I was going to say less miraculous, but I don't want to say that. Follow me. That perhaps the filling of the pot does happen when she goes to bed. She gets her son down, she goes to bed, and then one of her neighbors silently comes in the middle of the night and dumps a little bit of their pot into her pot. And then they go away unseen. And then another neighbor who has a little bit of extra oil comes in and fills the jar just a little bit, puts it back on the counter, and then goes away quietly. Many who've been part of the church have known seasons or have participated in the ministry of making groceries just appear at people's houses. You know, it's the great ding-dong ditch of the church. Bing bong, you open it up and it's not a flaming bag of anything, but instead it's a bag abundant of groceries. People have experienced that blessing. Where did it come from? God. People often talk about the miraculous as something that has to be unexplainable. And sure, I get that. I get that on some level, right? That there has to be some aspect of this could never happen otherwise. They talk about the miraculous and things happening in the community, and they reflect on things like, wouldn't it be a miracle if we came into church one Sunday and there was standing room only? Wouldn't it be miraculous if we were just overflowing with people on a random Sunday and God had brought so many people together to hear the word? Yeah, I mean, that would be miraculous. Certainly, I wouldn't be able to explain it. But wouldn't it be miraculous if a group of people with different life experiences, different backgrounds, from different ages, who have different jobs, different financial situations, different beliefs about different things, all came together to be one body, to love and support one another, to embody Jesus Christ made real in this world, to be the hands and feet of Christ, to truly transform this world into the kingdom of God. Wouldn't that be miraculous? Wouldn't it be miraculous if everybody who came went out and said, God has laid on my heart somebody that I'd like to invite to church next week? What if every one of us, I don't know, how many are there here today? Like 40, 50? Everybody invited one person and brought one person to church next week, and we doubled in size. Wouldn't that be wild? What if everybody went and asked one person, and then we grew by 10 people next week? Wouldn't that be miraculous? Wouldn't it be miraculous if a mom went to bed every night and God filled her jar in a mysterious way, unexplainable by science or reasons or fact? Wouldn't it be miraculous if a community of people came together and cared for a widow and her son during a time of drought and famine? We get caught up in the spiritual miraculous, right? That kind of definition of miracles are something that only God can do. And we lose the idea of miracles are something that only God can do and does it through us. I was not the best kid in the world. My siblings weren't the best kids in the world. It's a miracle my mother did not smother us. Isn't it a miracle that God calls godly men and women, especially women today? God blesses and equips them. God pours God's grace in and through them to bring a child from a baby into a full, mostly functioning adult. Isn't it a miracle that God brings so many people into our lives who pour into them, who transform us? I want to ask an important question this morning and a challenge for you to reflect on it. In this world that is sinful and broken, in this world where we have to, Genesis 2 tells us, right, where we have to invest our blood and sweat and tears into the ground to make it produce even just a little bit. In that world, is it essentially one of scarcity, where we don't have enough? Where we have to look out for me, myself, and I before any others. One where I have to kind of collect everything that I possibly can for me and my own. Or is this a world that is essentially abundant? One in which we can trust in God to be our provider in all ways, through our relationships, through our temporal concerns, through our physical, mental, and spiritual needs. Do we live in a world where we have to close ourselves off to others, or do we live in a world where we can share with one another? This morning I want to end with a story because it is my favorite story to tell. And maybe I could have done it for Kids Moment, but I didn't. So it's the story of stone soup. Anybody know the story of stone soup? There was a pastor, a Methodist circuit rider who was riding around the communities in his circuit. And he came into this new little town that had formed. And as he came into town, he was very hungry. And he went to the middle of the community in the town square, and he built a little fire, and he took a pot off of his horse, put it on the fire, put some water in it from the well, took a big rock and put it in the pot and started cooking. And a little kid comes out and goes, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm making stone soup. Would you like some?" "Yeah, I've never had stone soup before." "Well, it's almost done. Let me finish it, and then we can share some together." He takes a spoon and he dips out a little bit of the soup and tastes it. And he says, "Oh, this could really use some salt and pepper." And the little girl goes, "Oh, we have some salt and pepper at the house." She runs off. She brings back the salt and pepper, and they put it in. He says, "Okay, it's almost ready. Let it cook for a little bit." After a few minutes, he tastes it again. Another person comes out. "What's going on?" The little girl pipes up, "We're making stone soup." The pastor says, "Some carrots would really make this." And the guy goes, "I got some extra carrots." And he goes off and he brings some back, and they chop them up and they put them in. And as the day goes on, he starts early in the morning, and throughout the day people are popping in. They could use some potatoes. Oh, a chicken would be nice. Some like basil or garlic. These things would be great. And as the day goes on, more and more people are coming, and they each bring a little thing. And at the end of the day, the courtyard, the center of the town is filled with the smell of this delicious soup. And the pastor starts doling it out to everybody. And everybody's eating it, and the little girl goes, "I just can't believe that you can make this amazing meal with nothing but a stone." Do we live in a world where all we have are stones? And can God use those to bring about God's kingdom here? I pray that he can, and I pray that he will through each of our lives in this community, in this church, and in this world.